With our projects database created and our terminal logged in to the MySQL shell, it's time to start creating some tables. To begin, we'll write use projects. This will allow us to configure the database we're working with. For this to represent our projects and tasks, we'll be creating two tables. The first table will have our projects, where each project has an ID, title, and description. Each row will represent a project, and the ID, title, and description will be the columns. We'll create it with the SQL statement. We'll write create table. We're going to create a table called projects, and it will have a few columns. We'll have a project ID column. This will be of type int. We'll require it to have a value, so not null, and we'll have it auto increment. The next column will be the title. So we'll write title, and it'll be of type varchar 30. Then we'll have the description. That'll be a column, and we'll give it the type varchar, which is very similar to a string, and give it the value 255. The number in between the parentheses states how much data we can store inside of this column. For our description, we put 255, so that's about 255 characters. For our title, we have around 30 characters. And for our int, it works a little bit differently, but this gives us a pretty big number that we can store as the project ID. We have our columns set. Now we need to set the primary key relationship. So we're going to make this project ID our primary key with primary key. And we're going to have the project ID column be that primary key. This is the query, so we'll hit enter, and it creates our table. To prove that we've created a table, we'll write show tables, and it shows our projects table. The second table we're going to create will have the tasks associated with each project. So we'll have a project, and it'll have a series of tasks, and then we might have another project, and it'll have its own series of tasks. This second table is going to be about those tasks. Each task will be represented by a row with values for task ID, the associated project ID, and description. We could put a true or false column for whether the task has been completed or not, but we'll just delete the task as it gets completed. Let's clear this up, and I'm going to log in again to get access to our database. And we'll say use projects to get back into that database, and we'll create the next table with create table, tasks, that's the name of our table. And then we'll start putting in the columns, so that's our task ID. We'll give it a big number with int 11. We'll make it the primary key of this table, so we'll do the not null, auto increment, and later on we'll set that primary key relationship for the tasks table. Then we'll add the associated project ID. It'll have that same type, int 11. We'll also require it, saying it's not null. And our last column is that description, which will be a varchar with a generous amount of space. Next, we'll set that primary key. The primary key will be the task ID, and then we'll set the foreign key. So this is going to be the link to the projects table. So we'll say foreign key, setting up that relationship. The foreign key in our table will be the project ID, and that will reference, so we'll say references the project ID in the projects table. So we'll write projects, and then what column does it link to? The project ID in the projects table. So we'll close this statement with the parenthesis, put in that semicolon, and it's created. We'll write show tables, and got to add that semicolon, and we see the tables printed out for us. Great. Now, before we move on to Python, let's add a few items to this database. We're going to enter two projects, and they'll each have a task or two. To insert our first project, we'll write insert into projects. What do we want to insert? A title and description. So we want to fill out those two columns. And the values for those are going to be organize photos, and the description will be organize old iPhone photos by year. And we misspelled projects. This is a pretty common mistake to misspell something, so we'll go back and edit that, hit enter, and it's inserted. Now we'll insert a few tasks to go along with this project of organizing all of our photos. One task might be organizing the photos from 2020. So we'll go insert into. We'll want to put this task in the tasks table, so we'll put in the description and the project ID, and it will have the values organize 2020 photos. And the project ID will be 1 since we inserted our first project from before, and with an auto increment, it would give our first project the project ID of 1. We'll add a semicolon here, hit enter. It added that task. And we'll do this again for our 2019 photos. So I just did the up arrow to get access to my last command, and we'll just change that to 2019. Hit enter again, it inserted it again. We kept that same project ID because we want both of these tasks to be associated with the Organized Photos project. Let's insert another project. We'll write insert into, projects. Again, we'll do the title, description. The change will be what project we want to insert. We'll say read more. That's a project for us to do. And we'll add a description for how we're going to accomplish that, which will be read a book a month this year. We'll hit enter. It inserts that. Let's add a task to go along with that project. We'll go insert into the tasks. We'll have a description, a project ID. The description will be read The Huntress. And so this is a book, one of my favorite books, actually. And we'll put in a 2 for the project ID. So since this read more project was the second project that we've inserted into the database, we know that its project ID is a 2, so that's why we put a 2 here. And it's inserted. Now with the task table having that foreign key constraint, we cannot insert a task without a corresponding project ID. We will also have to delete tasks before we delete the corresponding project. With special operators such as onDelete Cascade, we can avoid this, but let's not get too into the weeds yet. For now, we'll use a few SQL statements to select the database contents and see what's in our database. We'll write select star from projects. So it's showing all of our projects. We had the Organized Photos project. That project ID is a 1. We see its description, and we see the same thing for the read more. We see its data, and we'll do the same thing for our tasks. And we see that data too. We see our Organized 2020 or Organized 2019, as well as our read the Huntress task. Now you might be wondering, could we have done this with SQLite? And the answer is yes. SQLite does have a shell program that we can run that's very similar to this. The main difference is how our SQL is written and the fact that our MySQL database is running on our local server at localhost rather than just located in our file system. Furthermore, everything we've done here can be done in Python. Our create database query, our insertion queries, and more. And I'll show you exactly how in the next lesson.